Across the US, agricultural workers still have the lowest rates of vaccination. But this is really not necessarily the problem in itself. This is just a symptom of the problem. Because when we look at the household pulse survey, it tells us that the rates of vaccination are lowest among those persons that are lacking healthcare and that are experiencing housing and food insecurity. So when we see, low rates of vaccination among agricultural workers, this is really a symptom of a much deeper problem that has to do, with lacking health care and experiencing housing and food insecurity. And I'll finish just by sharing some of our center's recommendations to focus on increasing the safety net, particularly for those most disadvantaged groups. We see that persons who don't have health insurance and often do not have enough to eat, on average have vaccination rates of about 39%. There's an opposite relationship between food sufficiency and vaccination rates. There's a relationship between food sufficiency and vaccination rates, as well as having health insurance and vaccination rates. But really where we see the greatest amount of disadvantage is those persons who don't have health insurance and often do not have enough to eat. And then lastly, I'm sharing a table, a figure that demonstrates that persons who are very likely, who had expressed being very likely to face the risk of eviction in the next 2 months, had a vaccination rate of only 35%. This was very different. This was, very different than those who were somewhat likely, or not very likely at all, to face a risk of eviction, whose vaccination rates were 64% and 68%, or those who are not likely at all, who had a vaccination rate of 80%. So I want to finish just by summarizing and saying that the Central Valley has high rates of pandemic-related death, including Kern County, that Kern County's high-risk workers, like agricultural workers and food processing workers, have high levels of disadvantage, but especially among agricultural workers. And that these high levels of disadvantage, such as housing and food insecurity, risk of eviction, are related to lower vaccination rates. So the implications of this research suggest that vaccination rates, that to improve vaccination rates and reduce the spread of COVID, there needs to be greater investment in expanding the safety net. And some of these provisions might consist of wage replacement for undocumented immigrants, extending paid emergency sick leave, because we know that it lapsed at the state level recently, or improving the distribution of rental assistance to renters who are at risk of eviction.